to Chapter 15, Sale and Leaseback. So for the first part of this chapter, it will be discussed by me, Janelle Abundo, followed by Ms. Galino. Before we proceed with the main discussion, the objectives of this chapter are as follows. First is to define a sale and leaseback. Second is to recognize a sale and leaseback on the part of the sellee. Third is to recognize a sale and leaseback on the part of the lessor. Fourth is to know the recognition of transfer of asset that is not a sale. So let us first define what a sale and leaseback is. So sale and leaseback, it is an agreement whereby one party sells an asset to another party and immediately leases it back from the new owner. So one party sells an asset that is called the underlying asset, which is purchased by the buyer. So meron kasing two transactions dito. First is yung sale, second naman is yung leaseback agreement. So after this sale, there is a leaseback, diba? Wherein the seller becomes the lessee and the buyer becomes the lessor. Therefore, dito sa sales and leaseback, the party involves the seller lessee and the buyer lessor. So in IFRS 16, paragraph 100, it says that for it to be considered as a sale and leaseback, there should be transfer of asset that results to a sale. So in the next slide, so here's an illustration of the sale price at fair value. So dito, ang sale price and fair value natin is the same. So let's read it. So on January 1, 2021, an entity sold machinery with a remaining life of 10 years and immediately listed back for 1 year. So sale price at fair value natin is 2 million. So this is how much the entity sold the machinery. Then, carrying amount of machinery na 1.8 million with an accumulated depreciation of 1.2 million, then annual rental of 300,000. So, before we proceed with the journal entries in the books of the seller lessee, ang ginamit natin ng lease model dito is operating lease model. Why? Because of its lease term of 1 year. So, number 1, to record the sale. Debit cash for 2 million, this is the sale price at fair value, and debit accumulated depreciation for 1.2 million, then credit machinery for 3 million, this is the original price of the machinery, and credit gain on right transferred for 200,000. So how did we get the 200,000? Nga pala muna, ang pagkakaalam ko is yung gain on right transferred, parang gain on sale na din yun or yun din talaga yun. So, ito na nga. So, sale price of 2 million less carrying amount of 1.8 million is equal to 200,000 pesos na gain. Then, second is to record the annual rental. So, debit rent expense for 300,000 and credit cash for 300,000 as well. Next is the books of buyer lessor. So number 1 is to record the purchase. So debit machinery for 2 million and credit cash for 2 million. So of course, you purchase nga ng asset, edi eventually mababawasan ka ng 2 million kapalit ng nabili mong machinery. Second is to record the annual rental. So debit cash for 100,000 and credit rent income for 100,000 as well. Third is to record depreciation of the machinery. So, depreciation is computed as sale price divided by useful life. So, 2 million divided by 10 years. So, which results to 200,000. So, our entry for this is debit depreciation for 200,000 and credit accumulated depreciation for 200,000. Another illustration of sale price at fair value. So let's read it. On January 1, 2021, an entity sold an equipment with remaining life of 10 years and immediately leased it back for 4 years at the prevailing market rental. So sale price at fair value natin is 6 million, carrying amount of 4,500,000 and annual rental of 800,000, implicit interest rate of 10%, and present value of 3.17. So lease liability is measured at the present value of rental payments. Kaya titingnan natin dito yung annual rental natin, which is yung 800,000. Then we will simply multiply it on present value na 3.17 for you to get the 2,536,000 pesos. So in the next slide, we have the table of amortization. So in this table, we can see the date, payment, interest, expense, principal amount, and present value. Now, I will explain paano nakuha tong mga to. So first, we will see in the first row our computed present value a while ago, which is the 2,536,000. Then on the second column is the payment of 800,000. So ito yung annual rental natin, which is fixed na for 4 years. Then on the third column is 10% interest rate. So it is computed simply by multiplying your present value to 10%. So for example, on December 31, 2021, yung present value mo nung January 1, 2021 na 2,536,000 is i-multiply mo lang siya sa 10% para makuha mo yung 253,600. Tapos yung 800,000 mo na payment on that year, ilalas mo lang siya sa 253,600 for you to arrive at the principal amount of 546,400 pesos. So, same procedure lang rin naman will follow sa next consecutive years. So, again, yung computations, present value multiplied by the interest, then it will equal to the interest expense, then payment less computed interest or yung interest expense natin is equal to principal amount. Now, moving on to the next slide, measurement of the right of use asset. So, as what was written on IFRS 16, paragraph 100, previous carrying amount in relation to right retained by seller lessee. That is why in getting the cost of right of use asset, we have to divide the right retained by seller lessee by the sale price at fair value. Then, multiply it by the carrying amount of the asset. Remember, yung right retained by seller lessee is also equal to lease liability. Kaya again, yung computation niya is 2,536,000 pesos na lease liability or present value din, divided by 6 million na sale price mo. Then, multiplied mo siya sa carrying amount na 4.5 million to get the final answer of 1,902,000 pesos. Yun yung ating cost of right of use asset. So next is the gain or loss to be recognized. So in IFRS 16 paragraph 100, gain or loss that pertains to the right retained by seller lessee is not recognized and is equal to this liability. So like a while ago nga, yung right retained by seller lessee natin is yung lease liability din na 2,536,000. Yan. Next naman is yung gain or loss that pertains to the right transfer to buyer lessor. Is recognized and is the fair value of asset minus the initial lease liability. So yun lagi yung computation niya, fair value less yung lease liability. Now, we are to compute for the total gain. So, sale price at fair value of 6 million less the carrying amount of equipment na 4.5 million. Then, we will get the total gain of 1.5 million. Next one is, as what I have mentioned a while ago, the gain that pertains to the right transfer to buyer lessor is recognized and computed as fair value less yung initial lease liability mo. So, ito na, fair value natin na 6 million. Nilas natin siya sa ating right retained by seller lessee, or yung lease liability nga na 2,536,000 pesos. Kaya makukuha natin yung right transfer to buyer lessor na 3,464,000. In gain to be recognized naman, tsaka gain not to be recognized. So first, compute muna natin yung gain to be recognized. So we will look at the right transfer to buyer lessor, which is yung ating 3,464,000. So yon is i-divide natin siya sa ating sale price na 6 million. Then after nun is i-multiply naman natin siya sa ating 1.5 billion na total gain para makuha natin yung 866,000. On gain not to be recognized naman, ang gagawin natin dito is i-divide natin yung ating right retained by seller lessee na 2,536,000 pesos sa ating sale price na 6 million. Then, ating i-multiply din siya sa ating 1.5 total gain para makuha natin yung 634,000 pesos. Then, after nating makuha yung results na yon, i-add lang natin yung gain to be recognized natin, tsaka gain not to be recognized para makuha natin yung adjusted total gain natin na 1,500,000 pesos. Next is the books of the seller lessee. So, before we proceed to the journal entries in the books of seller lessee, ang ginamit na lease model natin dito is financial lease model with a lease term of 4 years. So, number 1 is to record the sale and leaseback. So, debit cash for 6 million and debit right of use asset for 1,902,000, credit equipment for 4.5 million, lease liability for 2,536,000, and credit also gain on right transferred for 866,000. Second naman is to record the annual rental for the first year. So, debit interest expense for 253,600. So, nakuha natin to kanina, diba? As we multiply the lease liability of 2,536,000 sa ating interest rate na 10%. Then, debit lease liability din natin for 546,400. So, this is the principal amount like nakuha natin kanina sa table. Then, credit cash for 800,000 naman. Third naman is to record annual depreciation of right-of-use assets. So, debit depreciation for 475,500 and credit accumulated depreciation for 475,500 as well. So, yung right-of-use asset natin na 1,902,000 is dinivide lang natin siya sa ating 4 years na lease term. Next is the books of buyer lessor. So, in IFRS 16 paragraph 100, the buyer lessor shall account for the purchase of the asset applying lessor accounting standard. So, our applied lease model for this is the operating lease model. And with a lease term of 4 years or only 40% of the useful life of the underlying asset. And a lease liability of 2,536,000 less than 90% of the fair value of asset natin na 6 million. So, our journal entries will be number 1, to record the purchase of the underlying asset. Here, we will look at the sale price at fair value. Kaya, debit equipment for 6 million and credit cash for 6 million as well. Then, second is to record the annual rental. So, debit cash for 800,000 pesos and credit rent income for 800,000 pesos. Then, third is to record annual depreciation of equipment. So, debit depreciation for 600,000 pesos. So, to get this, syempre, ang ginawa lang natin dito is dinivide natin yung fair value natin na 6 million sa ating useful life na 10 years. Then, credit accumulated depreciation for 600,000 as well. Moving on to the next slide is an illustration naman for sale price above fair value. So, on January 1, 2021, an entity sold a building with a remaining life of 20 years and immediately leased it back for 5 years. So, ang sale price natin is 20 million, fair value is 18 million, carrying amount is 10.8 million, annual rental of 1.5 million, and implicit interest rate of 12% with a present value na 3.60. So, ang measurement of lease liability natin dito, yung present value of rentals natin, na-compute siya by multiplying yung ating annual rental na 1.5 million sa ating present value na 3.60 to get 5.4 million. Okay, so in IFRS 16, paragraph 101, so if the sale price does not equal the fair value of the underlying asset, the seller lessee shall make adjustments to measure the sale price at fair value. So any excess sale price over fair value shall be accounted for as additional financing provided by the buyer lessor to seller lessee. So we have the sale price of 20 million, which ilalas lang natin siya sa ating fair value na building natin na 18 million. So, ang ating excess sale price over fair value is 2 million. So, yung sinabi kanina, di ba, pag may excess sale price over fair value, magiging accounted siya for additional financing. So, yung 2 million natin is equals to additional financing nun. Then next is present value of lease liability. So 5.4 million. Ilalas natin yung ating additional financing kanina, which is 2 million, para makuha natin yung present value of lease liability related to rentals na 3.4 million. Next is yung ating cost of right of use asset naman. So this is computed as present value ng lease liability natin divided by the fair value of building, then multiply it to the carrying amount of the asset. Kaya 3.4 million divided by 18 million multiplied by 10.8 million to get 2,040,000 pesos. So in this slide naman, this is the same procedure in slide 12. So, ang ating fair value of building is 18 million with a carrying amount of 10.8 million. So, ilalas lang natin siya to get the total gain of 7.2 million. Next naman is ito, gain that pertains to the right transfer to buyer lessor is recognized and computed as fair value of asset minus the lease liability. So, 18 million less the 3.4 million, makuha natin yung ating right transfer to buyer lessor na 14.6 million. Again, same as the one on slide 12, to get the gain to be recognized naman dito, you just have to divide the 14.6 million, yung ating right transfer to buyer lessor, by 18 million, which is yung ating fair value. Then, i-multiply mo lang siya ulit dun sa ating total gain na nakuha natin kanina na 7.2 million para makuha mo yung 5,840,000. Then, on the other hand, yung gain not to be recognized naman, all you have to do is to divide the right retained by seller lessee na 3.4 million. Di-divide mo siya sa ating fair value again na 18 million, then multiply mo siya sa ating 7.2 na total gain. Then after nun, makuha mo yung 1,360,000. So, after you get both of the results, i-add mo lang sila 5,840,000 pesos added to 1,360,000 pesos, you will get an adjusted total gain of 7,200,000 pesos.
Good day everyone, I am Gwyneth, Dianne, Galino, and I will be discussing the continuation of illustration sale price above fair value. So, after natin makompute lahat from lease liability to the adjusted total gain, of course, it's time to finally do the journal entries. Let us see first the books of seller lessee. The first transaction is the sale and leaseback. Our entry would be debit cash, which is equal to the sale price, 20 million, and debit again right of use asset, an intangible asset, as we are given the authority or right na gamitin yung building na nirentahan natin, which accounts for 2,040,000 pesos. And then, credit, building, kasi syempre nabenta na nga natin yung building natin, which is equal to its fair value na 10,800,000 pesos. Another credit is lease liability kasi nagkaroon tayo ng utang as we lease back the building, which is 5,400,000 pesos. And lastly, credit again on right transferred 5,840,000 pesos, which pertains to the gain to be recognized at nagkaroon tayo nito kasi nga above fair value natin nabenta yung building. So, our next transaction is the annual rental for the first year or yung kabuang bayad na natin sa renta, which includes the lease liability itself and its corresponding interest. So first, we have to debit interest expense 648,000. Nakuha natin to by simply getting the 12% of the lease liability of 5.4 million. So bakit nga ba 12%? Kasi yun yung given na interest rate. Next is debit lease liability for 852,000. So ito naman yung difference between the annual rental payable of 1.5 million and the interest expense of 648,000. And lastly, credit, cash, 1.5 million, which is equal to the given annual rental payable nga natin. So, the third and last transaction for the seller lessee is the annual depreciation of right-of-use asset. Since it is an intangible asset nga, of course, nagde-depreciate din to over time at kailangan natin yon i-recognize annually. So, for the first year's depreciation, we have to debit depreciation for 108,000. Nakuha natin to by simply dividing the amount of right-of-use asset, which is 2,040,000 pesos, into 5 years kasi 5 years lang naman yung lease term. Then, credit, of course, accumulated depreciation for 408,000 as well. Now, let's proceed to the books of buyer-lessor. But before we discuss the journal entries, alamin muna natin kung ano nga ba yung applicable or dapat gamitin na lease model ni buyer-lessor. In this illustration, gumamit tayo ng operating lease model because of few reasons. Firstly, 5 years or 25% lang ng useful life ng asset yung lease term. E diba, to qualify sa finance lease model, dapat at least 75% ng useful life ng asset yung lease term. Secondly, 3.4 million or less than 90% ng fair value ng asset yung present value ng lease liability. E diba, again, to qualify in finance lease model, dapat yung present value of lease liability is at least 90% of fair value of the asset. Basta guys, we always have to keep in mind na kung hindi pasok sa qualifications ng finance lease model yung lease term and lease liability na napag-usapan, then eto na yung go signal natin na probably operating lease model yung gagamitin. Now, let's see the journal entries in the books of buyer-lessor. For the first transaction, let us record the purchase of the building. So we have to debit the building, 18 million, which is equal to its fair value, and debit financial asset, 2 million, which is equal to the excess sale price, then credit cash for 20 million. Then the second transaction is the annual rental related to lease. So, since diba lahat nga sa rental income and financing or financial asset yung annual rental natin, itong portion na to muna is related sa lease. So, we have to debit cash, 944,444 pesos. Then, credit rent income, 944,444 as well. The next transaction is the annual rental related to financing. So, ito naman yung portion from the total rent receivable na allocated to the financial asset. In here, we have the debit cash, 555,556, and credit, financial asset, na 315,556, and interest income, 240,000. The amount of the financial asset serves as the principal, then the interest income, of course, galing siya sa 12% interest ng financial asset. Later, pag pinakita ko na sa inyo yung table of amortization related to financial asset, mas maintindihan natin kung paano nga ba ito nakuha. Then finally, our last transaction would be the depreciation of the building for its first year. So debit, depreciation, 900,000. Nakuha natin to by dividing 18 million or the fair value of the building into 20 years since yun yung remaining useful life ng asset. Then of course, credit, accumulated depreciation for 900,000 as well. So this is the allocation of the annual rental. Ito na yung breakdown ng annual rental natin. So diba, ang present value of lease liability sa atin is 5.4 million. Bale, 3.4 million doon is from the rental income, while the remaining 2 million is from the financial asset. Then, yung annual rental receivable naman natin is 1.5 million. So, para makuha natin kung ilang percent lang ng total present value of lease liability yung allocated sa rental income and financial asset, we need to divide each of its present value sa total lease liability. Ayun yung makikita natin sa fraction, which is 3.4 million divided by 5.4 million and 2 million divided by 5.4 million. Ang makuha natin sagot doon ay i-multiply natin sa 1.5 million na annual rental receivable para malaman naman yung exact amount na allocated niya para sa rental income at financial asset. Bale, ito na yung pinakahinimay na version ng annual rental receivable natin, which are the amounts na inirecord natin previously sa journal entry natin. Now, let's move on to the amortization related to financial asset. Diba, nalaman na nga natin na 555,556 pesos yung allocated amount sa financial asset. So, in here naman, malalaman pa natin yung pinaka-breakdown nun annually. We'll start off, of course, on the very first day kung kailan nag-start yung lease agreement, which is January 1, 2021. So, syempre, buong 2 million pa siya, but at the end of the year, remember, it's an ordinary annuity, so the payment would be made every end of the period. So, ayun nga, nababayaran siya ng 555 and 556 pesos on December 31, 2021. At yung amount na yon, binubuo siya ng interest and principal. For interest, 240,000 siya, which is the 12% of the present value of the financial asset na 2 million. Then, yung principal is the difference between the payment and the interest. To get the present value of the financial asset naman for December 31, 2021, which is 1,684,443 pesos, all we have to do is just minus the principal at December 31 from the present value at January 1. So, laging ganun lang, ibabawas mo lang yung principal sa present value ng prior period to get the present value of the current period. Sa same computation lang every end of the year hanggang sa mag-arrive tayo sa zero kasi syempre, supposedly at the end of the lease term, dapat bayad na ng seller lessee yung lease liability niya. So now, let's see another illustration, which is sale price below fair value. So in this illustration, on January 1, 2021, an entity sold an equipment with remaining life of 8 years and listed back for 5 years. So as we can see, ito yung mga given nila. For the sale price, 5 million. Fair value of equipment, 6 million. So may difference na 1 million. Carrying amount of equipment for 4,800,000. Then yung annual rental payable naman is 900,000. The interest rate is 8%. And the present value of an ordinary annuity of 1 is 3.99. So of course, una natin aalamin is yung kung magkano ang lease liability. So to get the lease liability, all we have to do is to multiply yung annual rental payable na 900,000 sa 3.99 na present value of an ordinary annuity, which is equals to 3,591,000 pesos. So in here is the table of amortization. So makita naman natin dito yung pinaka-breakdown again ng lease liability. So of course, at the day 1, ay yung present value niya na 3,591,000. And then, at the end of the year, pag nagbayaran na, ito na, makikita na natin yung pinaka-breakdown nila. Sa interest, nakuha siya by getting the 8% ng 3,591,000 pesos. And then, yung principal, ibinawas lang yung interest sa payment, kaya nakuha natin yung 612,720 pesos. And then, to get the present value of the lease liability at the end of the year ng 2021, ipabawas lang natin yung principal na 612,720 sa present value ng beginning of the year, which is 3,591. Then we arrive at 2,978,280 pesos. Then, hanggang sa mga susunod na end of the year until 2025, hanggang sa matapos yung lease term, ganun lang lagi gagawin natin. Until, ayun nga, mag-zero na. Kasi nabayaran na yung lease liability. So, diba, sabi nga sa IFRS 16 paragraph 101, basta hindi mag-equal yung sale price as fair value ng asset, the seller's lessee shall make adjustment to measure the sale price at fair value. In this case naman, pag below fair value yung sale price, yung difference nila i-consider as prepayment of rental. So remember, if sale price is greater than fair value, it will be accounted for as additional financing provided by the seller lessee to the buyer lessor. But just like in this case, if the sale price is less than the fair value, it will be accounted for as prepayment of rental. In this illustration, since hindi na equal yung fair value sa sale price, kailangan natin malaman kung gaano kalaki excess fair value over sale price. So, gagawin lang natin is to get the difference between the two, which is 6 million minus 5 million and equals to 1 million. So, di ba according nga sa IFRS 16 paragraph 101, kapag hindi equal yung fair value and sale price, kailangan natin adjust. At kapag below fair value, yung sale price, ang kailangan natin i-consider itong excess na prepayment of rental. So, ang gagawin natin is i-add natin yung excess na yon sa present value ng rental na na-compute natin kanina. So, that is 3,591,000 pesos plus 1 million. So, we arrive at a total lease liability of 4,591,000 pesos. So, next naman, after that, ang kailangan naman natin kunin is yung cost of right-of-use asset. So, para makuha natin to, kailangan lang natin magtandaan yung pinaka-formula na PV over FV times CA, which is present value of rental na 4,591 over or divided by the fair value ng equipment na 6 million times the carrying amount of the equipment, which is 4,800,000 pesos, and we arrive at 3,672,800 pesos. So, next naman natin nga alamin is yung gain to be recognized. So, before we proceed to that, of course, kailangan mo natin alamin yung pinaka-total gain. So, para makuha yun, kailangan lang natin kunin yung difference between the fair value na 6 million and the carrying amount na 4.8 million, which is equals to 1.2 million. So, next naman natin kukunin is yung right transfer to buyer lessor. So, ang pinaka-formula naman na ito na kailangan lang natin tandaan is FV minus RR is equals to RT. So, FV stands for fair value ng equipment, which is 6 million, minus the RR, which is the right taken by seller lessee na equal siya dun sa lease liability, yung total. Kasi i-include natin yung excess fair value, which is 4,591,000 pesos. Then, yung difference nilang dalawa, yun na yung magiging pinaka-total na makuha natin na right transfer to buyer lessor, which is 1,409,000 pesos. So, di ba, ang pinaka-total gain natin, divided siya into 2 or nabe-breakdown siya into 2. So, first is the gain to be recognized. And the second one is the gain not to be recognized. Ang gain na i-recognize lang natin, as we recall, yung right transferred lang. So, para i-complete natin yung gain to be recognized, kukunin lang natin yung portion ng right transferred. Then, i-divide siya sa fair value ng equipment. Then, yung total noon na makuha natin is i-multiply sa total gain ng 1.2 million. So, ito na yung 281,800 pesos. So, next, gain not to be recognized. Ang kukunin naman natin portion is the right retained by seller lessee since ito yung hindi natin i-recognize, di ba? So, i-divide siya sa fair value na 6 million times the total gain para makuha natin yung portion na 1.2 million na yung total gain. And then, we arrive at 918,200. And pag inad natin yung gain to be recognized and not to be recognized, of course, dapat magiging 1.2 million siya na magtatali sa total gain na na-compute natin kanina. Now, let's move on to the journal entries. So first, let's see the books of seller lessee. So of course, the first transaction would be the sale and leaseback. We have the debit cash, 5 million. Debit right-of-use asset, 3,672,800. Then credit equipment na nabenta natin for 4.8 million na carrying amount. Lease liability na 3,591,000. Then gain on right transfer na 281,800. So gain on right transfer lang ang dapat nating i-recognize kaya siya lang nating i-record. So The next transaction will be the annual rental for the first year. So we have to debit interest expense 287,280, debit lease liability 612,720. So itong dalawa na to, ito yung kanina na nasa table of amortization natin. Then credit cash for 900,000 pesos. So the last transaction for the seller lessee would be the annual depreciation of right of use asset. So debit depreciation, credit accumulated depreciation for 724,560. Nakuha natin to by simply getting the cost of right of use asset na na-compute natin kanina and divided by 5 years na lease term natin. Now let's proceed to the books of buyer lessor. So before the journal entries, kailangan natin alamin yung lease model na ginamit, which is the operating lease model. Again, ito ulit yung applicable na lease model for this illustration kasi hindi na-qualify sa finance lease model yung lease term and present value ng lease liability. Let us now see the journal entries in the books of buyer lessor. So for the first transaction is the purchase of the equipment, which is debit equipment and credit cash for 5 million na equal dun sa sale price of course. Then, the next transaction will be the annual rental, debit cash and credit rent income, 900,000, which is equal doon sa annual rental payable. Then, the third transaction would be the annual depreciation of equipment, debit depreciation and credit accumulated depreciation for 625,000 pesos. So, para naman makuha to, ang ginawa natin is, kinuha natin yung sale price ng equipment, then in-divide siya sa remaining useful life niya. Let's have another illustration, which is sale price at fair value with loss. So, in this illustration, equals naman si sale price at fair value. However, nagkaroon ng loss kasi mas mababa yung value nila compared to the carrying amount ng asset. So, sale price at fair value in this illustration is 10 million, while the carrying amount is 12 million. Then the annual rental payable is 500,000, interest rate 8%, present value of an ordinary of 2.58. Then the lease term is 3 years. So, katulad sa mga nakaraang illustration, kailangan natin unang i-compute is the lease liability. So, to get it, as usual, kukunin lang natin yung annual rental payable, i-multiply sa present value of an ordinary annuity na 2.58, and we arrive at 1,290,000 pesos. So this is the table of amortization. So at the day 1, present value is 1,290,000 pesos. Then at the end of the year 2021, pag magkakabayaran na. So, di ba ang payment consists of interest and principal. So to get the interest, kukunin lang natin yung 8% ng 1,290,000. Then, yung principal naman is only the difference between the payment and interest. Then, after we get the principal, ipaglawas na natin yung principal na yon sa present value at the day 1. So, 1.2 million minus 396,800 is equals to 893,200 na magiging present value naman niya ng December 31, 2021. And the same computation goes sa mga susunod na period until we arrive at 0. Then, next is we compute for the cost of right of use asset. So again, kukunin lang natin yung present value, i-divide siya sa fair value ng asset, then i-multiply sa carrying amount. So we arrive at 1,548,000 pesos. So of course, just like in gains, kailangan din natin malaman kung magkano yung loss na i-recognize. But before that, kailangan natin alamin kung magkano yung total loss. So to get that, just have to get the difference between the sale price na 10 million minus the carrying amount na 12 million and equals to 2 million na loss. So after that, kukunin natin yung right transfer to buyer lessor. So again, the formula would be FV minus RR equals to RT. So FV, or the fair value na 10 million, minus the right taken by seller na equals lang naman sa lease liability na 1,290,000. So, equals to 8,710,000 pesos na right transfer to buyer lessor. So, para makita natin yung breakdown ng total loss, alamin natin muna yung loss to be recognized. Again, ang i-recognize lang natin is yung right transfer to buyer lessor. So, yun lang yung kukunin natin. I-divide natin siya sa fair value, then i-multiply sa total loss, which is 742,000 pesos. Then next, loss not to be recognized, kukunin lang natin yung right to retain na 1,290,000 pesos. And they divide sa fair value na 10 million, then i-multiply sa 2 million na total loss, which is equals to 258,000 pesos, and a total of 2 million na loss. Let's proceed to the journal entries with the books of seller lessee. So the first transaction will be the sale and leaseback. We have the debit cash 10 million, debit right of use asset 1,548,000 pesos, and debit loss on right transfer. Since loss now, we have to debit it na 1,742,000 pesos. Then credit building 12 million, and credit again lease liability na 1,290,000 pesos. So for the next transaction is the annual rental for the first year. So this is the debit na interest expense 103,200, and debit again lease liability 396,800. Itong dalawang to ang kaninang kinompute natin sa table of amortization. Then credit cash na 500,000 pesos. Our third transaction would be the annual depreciation of right of use asset. So we need to debit depreciation and credit accumulated depreciation for 516,000 pesos. Again, nakuha lang to by simply getting the cost of right of use asset and divide it by the lease term. Let us see now the books of buyer lessor. So, ang ating applied lease model for this illustration is operating lease model. Bakit? Dahil ang lease term is less than 75% ng useful life ng asset, then the present value of lease liability is less than the 90% ng fair value ng asset. So, hindi ulit sila nag-qualify sa finance lease model. So, here are the journal entries on the books of buyer lessor. So, the first transaction would be the purchase of building. So, we have the debit building and credit cash for 10 million, which is equivalent to the sale price. Then, next is the annual rental, which is debit cash, and credit rent income, which is equal to 500,000 pesos. Then, the last transaction would be the depreciation of the building, which is debit depreciation and credit accumulated depreciation for 400,000 pesos. So, nakuha to by simply dividing the sale price of 10 million to 25 years of remaining life. For the last part of our discussion, let us discuss the transfer of asset that is not considered as a sale. So according to IFRS 16 paragraph 103, if the transfer of an asset by the seller lessee does not satisfy the requirements for the recognition of a sale, so ito yung dalawang side. First side is the seller lessee. So ang seller lessee daw dapat patuloy pa rin na i-recognize yung transferred asset at yung financial liability niya, which is equal to the transfer proceeds. So, the entry for the seller lessee would be debit cash, then credit lease liability. For the recognition of rental or lease payment and interest, katulad lang din siya like the usual. For the lease payment, it is accounted for as partially payment of interest and partially payment of principal ng lease liability. Then for the interest, it is computed base sa implicit interest rate using the effective interest method. For the side of the buyer lessor naman, dapat daw hindi i-recognize ni buyer lessor yung transferred asset. Kasi nga hindi naman siya sale. Then, pero, on the other hand, dapat i-recognize niya yung financial asset, which is equal to the transfer proceeds. So, for the buyer lessor, the entry would be debit lease receivable, then credit cash. For the recognition of rental or lease payment from seller lessee, i-account to as partly collection ng interest income and partly collection ng principal ng lease receivable, just like the usual.
That would be all for our report, and we're leaving you with this Bible verse from Romans 8:18, and it says, "The pain that you've been feeling can't compare to the joy that's coming." Again, I am Gwyneth Dianne Galino, together with Miss Janelle Abundo, your reporters for Chapter 15.